My name is Heather, and welcome to this DVD, which we've called Joy Cometh in the Morning. Many, many years ago now, when I was having my first baby, I went into the maternity unit, and the maternity unit at that time was based in an old house, which meant it had all the big stone windows, it had the high ceilings, it had been a beautiful place. It had been a very long, lonely night in that labour room. There didn't seem to be anybody to talk to, and in those days you didn't have family with you. You just grit your teeth and you get on with it. But just as the dawn was beginning to break, they moved me into the delivery room, and what a beautiful room it was. There was a big bay window, and in the big bay window were stained glass panels. Outside there was a lovely view of the gardens and rowan trees with red berries. It was really very attractive if I'd been in a mood to see it. But I did notice the words in the stained glass, and those words in the stained glass said, "Joy cometh in the morning." And just after 7 o'clock, as the sun was coming up, it shone through those windows, and joy did come. A little baby girl was born. But how would it have been if all during that long night and those hours in the delivery room, I didn't know what was happening? I think you've probably all heard of people that have had a baby and didn't know that that baby was on the way, didn't know what the pains were, and were so surprised when at the hospital they were told, "You're in the last stages of labour. You're going to have a baby soon," and they knew nothing. And I think that that is a little bit what our world is like at the moment. It's going through a lot of pain, a lot of distress. There's fear everywhere. May not be showing on the surface as people are booking holidays and planning, but underneath in people's hearts there is fear. I read recently that this world at the moment has more hotspots than at any other time. I don't know if that's true or not, because you can't believe everything you read. But it was saying that our world is in a very dangerous situation, because these hotspots are more diffuse. They're more difficult to unwind. Those hotspots require more people's involvement, more carers needed in the world, and the resources of the world, the human resources of the world, can't match the needs, whether it be for warfare or whether it be for disaster. Whatever it is, our coping skills are right on the edge of not being able to cope. That's what's happening to our world. In a time like this, do we have an anchor that we can rely on, or do we need to be afraid? Let me tell you that we do have an anchor, and that anchor is the Word of God. The Word of God, the Bible, is made up of a lot of prophecy. There is a great deal of prophecy in the Bible, and almost all the prophecies that are in here have been fulfilled. It is now coming towards the very end of the prophecies that have been given us. Let me try and give you a diagram which will show you in a better way how we're placed. Here is the diagram that I want to show you, because this will begin to explain why we've got all the problems that we have in the world today. Can you see the straight line all the way across? That is the line of eternity. God intended Adam and Eve and this world, when it was made in its original perfection, to go on forever and ever and ever in gladness and happiness, with no problems like there are today. The problems we have today were never in God's plan. But Adam and Eve, just shortly after their creation, about here, sinned. They disobeyed God. And when they disobeyed God, they brought in blame, they brought in hatred, they brought in murder. It all came. And so what God did was to take them away from the eternity timeline and make a detour. And this detour is a chance for everybody to have an opportunity. Will they choose God or will they not? And out of the people on this timeline here, he will make up the people who are safe to put back onto the line of eternity. Now, each one of us has round about 70 to 80 years, something like that. And in that time, all the way round the circle, if you like, generation after generation, for the last 6,000 years, have had the opportunity to choose God. And we know from the Bible that many have, but we know from the Bible too that many have scoffed and laughed and rejected God. This is what we're on. It's not a long timeline that goes on forever that we're on. God has put us on a detour. That detour will come to an end. And we, at the moment, are almost here. We're almost at the end of that detour. And I can tell you why. Because the prophecies in the Bible have been fulfilled all the way except for this last bit here. And this is why it's important to know. And interestingly, God said that the last events here would break on the world just like the pains of a woman going into labour. All this was like the gestation period, a fairly quiet period of choice. But now it's all beginning to come to an end. I want to show you something from the Bible that will show you where we are on this timeline. Let me read from Revelation chapter 6 from verse 12. And I beheld, when he had opened the sixth seal, and lo, there was a great earthquake. A great earthquake. No wonder God said that when the final event started to happen, it would break on the world like a woman going into labour. But let me just explain something first, because when it talks about the sixth seal, that implies that 5 other seals have already gone before. And they have. And those are all very interesting prophecies to know about. But it's like a scroll with seals all down the edge of it. And each time God opens one more seal to show us what is actually going to happen. And when he opened the sixth seal, there was a great earthquake. This was the beginning of the sixth seal, and there's only one more to come, the seventh seal. And that seventh seal says, I will come again. That's when the joy will come in the morning. So you can see that in the sixth seal, we're right in the very last events. Now, was there a great earthquake any time in recent history? Yes, there was, and it's known as the Lisbon earthquake. The Lisbon earthquake was a huge earthquake, probably somewhere in the region of 9 on the scale of measurement. And that earthquake took place in Lisbon, in Portugal, in 1755. And it's often described as the father of all earthquakes. As you know, with big earthquakes that happen near the coast or just by the sea, there are tsunamis that follow. And that's exactly what happened with this one. There were 3 tsunamis followed from this earthquake. Lisbon itself was almost completely flattened with immense lot of life. Only very few buildings remained standing, or at least the shells of them remained standing. there were fires throughout the city as well, because it was a time when they were celebrating All Souls' Day. So there were candles, garlands of artificial flowers. The candles fell and the flowers caught light, and the fire through the wind spread through that city. But it wasn't just there. It was North Africa. There were thousands of people lost their lives in North Africa because of it. And the tsunamis were so enormous that they went up as far as Ireland. They went right across to Brazil. And in Ireland, there's a record that the boats in the harbour, in one of the little fishing towns on the southwest corner of Ireland, the little boats were swirled right round by their anchors, by these waves. And the big waves just continued coming and came in and flooded the town. This big earthquake was actually felt as far away as Greenland and Finland. So you can imagine how big an earthquake it was. In Loch Lomond in Scotland, the water in the loch fell by 10 feet and then came back up again, and did that 3 or 4 times until it finally settled calm again at its own level. This was a huge earthquake, and as I said, geologists consider this as the father of all modern geological earthquake events. Let me read those words again from Revelation 6, verse 12. And behold, when he had opened the 6th seal, and lo, there was a great earthquake. There's a tick in that box. It's been fulfilled. But the verse doesn't stop there, because it goes on with 3 more things. It says, after that, it says, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood, and the stars of heaven fell unto the earth. Now, what about a day when the sun went black? Has that happened? Yes, it has. Let me tell you a little bit about that. It was in 1780, and in 1780 people woke up in the morning. It was a May morning, and the sun was shining. It was a beautiful early summer day, but suddenly the gloom started to come. The sky began to get darker. In fact, people found it very eerie and very quiet and very odd, and they were really quite frightened. And this gloom didn't get any less. In fact, the animals started coming home to their stables. The birds in the sky went quiet, and the chickens went home to roost. Everything was happening as if night was coming, and the darkness continued. The darkness thickened until by lunchtime the darkness was so deep that people had to light the candles and they couldn't see anything outside, and the darkness got deeper. Shortly after that, people found that if they, in spite of candles in the room, held up a piece of paper in front of their eyes, they couldn't even see the piece of paper. It was just like the darkness of a thick black velvet. The horses that had been out pulling carriages, or the ones that were working, were so terrified that they refused to move another step. Nobody knew what it was. People tried to come home from work, but they couldn't. The courthouse had to adjourn its sessions. There are so many reports of this. No, it wasn't an eclipse. An eclipse never lasts that long. An eclipse comes quite deep, but it never lasts for hours and hours and hours. And in fact, the moon was full at that time, so it was definitely not an eclipse. People have been speculating ever since, and a scientist called Herschel has said that it is one of the mysteries of nature that probably only God understands. And so, on that morning, God fulfilled the next sign. But what about the moon becoming as blood? And I don't mean what we've been talking about recently in the news of blood moons. I think this is where people get the idea from. But this was something much more strange. It was a much deeper blood colour than anything that we've seen today. And I've seen a blood moon. All it means is that it's a slightly deeper reddy orange than normal. But this was a moon that came out that night, after midnight, following the time when the darkness began to lift just a little bit. And the moon could be seen through this darkness, and it really did look like blood. And so we've had the earthquake, we've had the dark day, we've had the moon turning as blood. By the next morning, all was clear and sunshiny, as if nothing had ever happened. But God had fulfilled the prophecies. No human being had made it happen. No human being could say, it was a fake. It wasn't anything. That dark day spread over a great deal of America, right up into Canada. It spread right over the ocean. It was something quite unheard of. But interestingly, we need to think, why was this seen in America? It was because not too far before that, there had been the Pilgrim Fathers, and they had left Europe to escape persecution. And so the true understanding of the Bible, which had been forbidden in Europe, was beginning to be understood in America. And therefore God allowed them to see these things happening so that they could know that what God says in His Word is for real. It's true. It can be relied on. And it happens without people doing anything. So many speculations have been made, but none of them makes any sense. Next sign that God gave in that chapter was about the falling stars. And by falling stars we mean a shower of meteorites. Now these happen every year somewhere, but in 1833 there was the biggest shower that's ever been recorded. It was huge. But I need to go back just a little bit, because round about 1830 people were beginning to read the Bible more, and they read in the Bible Jesus' promise, I will come again. They had read about the other two being fulfilled, and now the ministers were preaching that these signs were happening. And one night, as people were returning home from some of these meetings where they'd been exploring the truth, I will come again, the stars began to fall. And that verse said that when the stars would fall, it would be as if somebody took a fig tree and shook it in a mighty wind, and all the figs would fall from a central point, and they would fall to the earth. And that's exactly what happened with this meteor shower. In the zenith, right at the peak of the sky, the stars began to fall and come in hundreds and thousands. And that's not an exaggeration. The falling of these stars was so bright that even the people who were in bed woke up and wondered what this strange light was that was filling their room. People who had come home from these meetings and had not given their heart to God were terrified. Some are recorded as having been kneeling down in the street to put their lives right with God, because they thought this was the coming of the Lord. This was the coming of judgment. Because Jesus had said, that forgotten promise we talked about, I will come again. Those three marker points, at almost the end of this time circle have happened. We're already into the last events. And you know yourself that when labour really starts properly, it doesn't stop until a baby is born. It doesn't stop until there's an outcome. We, the world, has gone into labour. There will be an outcome because Jesus said, I will come again. Let's go and listen to Jesus talking to his disciples. They'd been talking about events that had been happening, and the disciples said to Jesus, tell us, what is going to be the sign of thy coming? And what is the sign of the end of the world? You see, they knew enough to put those two things together. How did they know? Because the prophet Enoch, who lived 7 generations on from Adam, which wasn't very long after Adam and Eve had fallen, on the time chart, if you like, you could put it about here. Enoch was preaching that God would come from heaven with the angels. They knew, and they knew that that was judgment. They knew that it was going to be the end of the world. So Jesus led them out from Jerusalem. They went for a short walk. They went privately to the Mount of Olives, and Jesus sat them down. And he more or less said to them, there are things you need to know. These are the things that you're going to have to understand. And so he told them the things that would happen. Jesus told them that there were things that they should understand. He said that the sun would be darkened, the moon would not give her light, and the stars would fall. You see, Jesus gave those same 3 signs. And the disciples would have been familiar with that as well, because their Bible was the Old Testament. And another of the prophets, Joel, in the Old Testament, had spoken exactly of those same 3 signs in the same sequence. But after he had mentioned those things to them, he told them about other things that they ought to be aware of. He said that there are going to be wars and rumours of wars before he came back. Nation would rise against nation. Are we seeing this happening today? He said there would be commotions and disturbances. Have we seen commotions and disturbances in our cities? But interestingly, Jesus said, when you see these things begin to come to pass, don't be afraid. These are the signs that my coming is very near. Jesus said that there would be hunger, there would be famine, there would be epidemics and diseases that would be in the world. He gave all these signs. We're seeing them all happening today. He said there would be earthquakes in different places. We've seen that too. So all these signs are fulfilling, even as we're giving this report now. Jesus has prophesied, and the prophecies are coming true, just as he said. And he said to them, I will come again. And that was to be the end of the world. But he did give a warning. He said, there will be fakes, just like we have fake news today. And that fake news will be, Jesus has come. Jesus is at a big hotel in London. Jesus is out in the wilderness. And Jesus said, don't flock to see, because that is not true. When I come, it will not be like that. Don't be misled. And I want to just warn you about one other thing. Don't switch on your television if you hear rumours like this, because through the television you could be hypnotized into believing false things, because the devil is the one that's behind these false reports to make you believe things that are not true. He doesn't want people to be ready when Jesus comes, and he's trying to spoil your learning about Jesus and making yourself ready for Jesus to come. Those were the signs that Jesus gave of his coming. But were they the only signs he gave? No. He gave signs through Paul. And Paul explained that there would be a lot of social signs. He talked about people being unthankful. Not much gratitude in the world. People just accepting it and saying, whatever, and just ignoring the kindness that you'd given. There would be rage in the world. There would be fierceness. There would be violence. He said there would be children disobedient to parents. And he said that people will be boastful and proud and ambitious and thinking of themselves. When we see these things come, Paul said to know that we are in the last days. Those last days before Jesus comes back. We've seen those signs as well. But Jesus gave another sign too. He said on another occasion when he was talking to the disciples, he said, do you remember what the Bible said of what it was like just before Noah's flood? People were marrying, giving in marriage, planting vineyards, eating the fruit of their vineyards, building houses, inhabiting them. They were eating and drinking. They were doing all these things. There's nothing wrong with any of those things. But it's when they take over our whole lives, that's when it's a sign. You've only got to walk down the high street today. And what do you see? Lots of eating places. You see clothes shops. You see beauty salons. You see so many things like that, where people are just wrapped up in how they can be. When Jesus said people would be marrying and giving in marriage, when did you last look at a celebrity magazine? This person's wedding was so much more extravagant than that one. In fact, one of the big magazines called Country Life has recently said, please just stop, because some of you are ruining the countryside by having these expensive weddings, trailing people all over the beauty spots of England. Stop it. Pull back. Just have simple weddings. This was a sign that Jesus is coming very soon. The prophet Daniel gave another sign that we ought to be aware of. And he said that in the last days, it's a Bible expression that's used so much, he said that men would run to and fro, people would run to and fro. I wonder how busy Heathrow Airport was this morning. Just a thought. He also said that knowledge would be increased. And my husband and I were talking the other day about our family, our parents, our grandparents. They lived in the same village. They were brought up on the same street. They didn't go anywhere. They didn't know very much. They didn't have anything like we have today. Can you think of the things that we have today that we take for granted? We've sat-navs in cars. We can have FaceTime on our laptops, on our tablets. We can have things like that. We have so many things. We hear of drones making deliveries. We hear of cars without drivers. These things would be unbelievable, even if you went back 50 years. I used to enjoy in my very young days a bit of science fiction. I think things have almost gone beyond science fiction sometimes. The prophet Daniel said these things would all happen before Jesus came. These were the signs of labour. When a woman goes into labour, does she have stages and signs? Yes, she does. And the easiest one to recognise for those that are helping her is to see the emotional signs. When a woman first goes into labour, there's a kind of sense of exhilaration. We're on our way. It's happening. We're going to have a baby. And there is a little bit of light-heartedness, a bit of joking, going and having a shower and doing your hair, maybe stopping at McDonald's to get a meal on the way to the hospital, as I heard from one of my friends. But when labour really gets going in hospital, things become quite serious. And when that woman is asked then, would you like a drink? Would you like a light snack? Can I give you a massage? Don't know. Don't care. Don't know what I want. It's a very different attitude. And people know by that what stage of labour it's come to. The next stage of labour that comes is when the contractions get so close together and the woman may almost give up. She can be crying, she can be afraid, she can be angry. It's a time of turbulence and unrest because all the hormones are all kicking in to do a different job with her body. And so at that time, those watching know that it's not going to be very long, and to give her as much encouragement as possible. You can do it. Just hold on. Let's just count the seconds in the contractions. Let's just see how long they're lasting. It really isn't going to be very long now. Just hold on. And then suddenly, out of the blue, comes this desire to push so hard. And then the nurse will say, I can see the baby's head eventually. And you know that that little child is very nearly there. This is the stage we're at with the world. Joy cometh in the morning. We're very close to the end. One day, Jesus will come. He's given us so many warnings, and all those warnings say, be ready, get ready, for in such an hour as ye think not, the Son of Man cometh. He gives us these warnings in plenty of time beforehand. And Jesus gave one more sign. And that other sign that will happen is that this gospel will be preached in all the world for a witness, and then shall the end come. And this is why I'm making this DVD, because I want you to have this message. I don't know how far around the world this DVD will travel, but I want to do my part. I want to tell you that God is so good. God is so reliable. He can be trusted when nothing else can be. God is wonderful. I've learnt to trust God. In fact, now I make it my rule in life to say to God in the morning when I wake up, here we are again together, Lord. What shall we do today? What would you like me to do for you? How can I help get everything ready for you to come back? I want to be a loyal supporter. And Jesus said that when the gospel goes to all the world, it will be for a witness. I want to be one of those witnesses. I want to give the gospel. I want people to see from some little thing in my life that God is good. I want to be a living witness for God. So, what will it be like when Jesus comes back? And I'm going to tell you just briefly what you will see, what you will hear, and what you will feel. So what will you see when Jesus comes back? Before Jesus went back to heaven, he told his disciples that he would come again. And as he went up to heaven, he was caught up to heaven in a cloud. There were angels, and 2 angels came to talk to the disciples, and they said, this same Jesus that you have seen go into heaven will come back in the same way as you saw him go. So, if it's going to be the same Jesus, he's going to have the nail prints in his hands. It wasn't long before he went to heaven that the disciple was wanting to touch the places where the nails had gone in his hand. He went to heaven with those same things in his hands. But there were also angels. There were clouds. And Jesus had said to the men at his trial, one day you will see me coming back in the clouds of heaven with all power and all glory. So Jesus had already warned about this, that this is how it was going to be. The Bible tells us that when Jesus comes, he will come with all the angels of heaven. Daniel tells us that there are 10,000 times 10,000 and thousands of angels. Once some friends of mine, just for a fun exercise, decided we would get a long roll of paper and we would decide how many noughts that should be along this roll of paper. We gave up trying. There are so many angels, and all the angels of heaven are going to come. It reminds me of what Jesus said. When you see these signs happening on earth, you'll know that you're going to soon see all the angels, because you will have seen all the signs happening. Not just one here, one next year, one another time, but all happening together. And when you see those things all together, then you will know that I am just by the door. When somebody's just by the door, your friend is there. And that's what it will be like. And so from seeing all the signs, you will then see all the angels beginning to come through the sky. Jesus will be seated on a throne. Jesus will be wearing a crown. He will still be the same Jesus that the disciples knew and loved. He will still have the marks in his hands, but now he will be the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, the King of all the nations. Nobody, like Satan did, want to be the King of all. And so Jesus will begin to come. There will be a trumpet that will sound. There will be a shout from heaven. That trumpet has already been heard once before. It was a great blast of a trumpet, and it happened when the 10 Commandments were given on the Mount Sinai. The people were so terrified because that trumpet, and you know how loud a trumpet is. My son used to play a trumpet. The trumpet comes louder and louder and louder until the people could bear it no longer. When Jesus comes back, that trumpet will sound again. What about that shout from heaven? Do you remember when Lazarus was raised from the tomb? Jesus called to Lazarus in the tomb and said, "Lazarus, come forth." Jesus will give that same shout. All over the world there are graves of people who have been faithful to God. And Jesus will call to all his sleeping faithful in those graves, "Awake, awake, come forth from the grave." And all over the world, graves will open and people will stand up out of those graves. When you're put in a grave, you're put down, to lie down, to sleep. Now, Jesus will wake them up and they will stand to meet Jesus. They will see Jesus coming in the cloud of heaven. The blessed hope that they've looked forward to will be there. It will be for real. Jesus has said, "I will come again." This is what the blessed hope is, and he says to those who mourn the death of loved ones, "Sorrow not as others that have no hope." We have this hope of a resurrection, and this is what will happen when Jesus will come. Do you remember I told you about people that say that Jesus has come, he's in London, he's in the desert? Don't go out to see him, because there will be no resurrection. It is the resurrection that cannot be faked. Only Christ can give life. The devil who will try to fake it cannot give life. Do not be deceived. And Jesus said that so many times. But what will you hear? Now, we've already talked about the trumpet and the voice of Christ, but as those angels come down from heaven, they will be singing. Can you imagine the greatest choir that you have ever heard, with notes reaching higher than you've ever heard, notes reaching deeper than you've ever heard? It will be spine-tingling. It will be the most amazing choir that you could imagine. And the prophet Isaiah told us that when the dead who are raised, when they're cast out of their graves, they will be cast out of their earthly sleeping places singing. So the songs of earth will match with the songs of Christ coming. Do you realize that when Jesus comes, when the real Jesus comes, he will not stand on the earth. He will not walk in Jerusalem. He will not visit the United Nations in America. Our Saviour will be in the sky above the world. This is how we know that it is the real Jesus. Jesus has given us so many proofs that we should not be deceived. And so what will we feel when Jesus comes? The most wonderful thing that we shall feel is that those of us who have put our lives ready, and my prayer is that each of you listening will think solemnly about putting your life ready too. Those who have put their lives ready will feel their feet lifting up off the earth and being taken into that big cloud of angels to be taken to a heavenly home. But what's happening on the earth at this time? There are things happening on the earth. Do you remember those labour pains that began? How did they begin? With a great earthquake. How will it finish? With the greatest of all earthquakes. In fact, it will be so great that the islands will disappear. The mountain chains will collapse. The cities will collapse. All the institutions of evil will collapse. Thousands and thousands of those who have not prepared their lives to meet Jesus will be running to those rocks and mountains because they will not want to look at the face of Jesus. Can you imagine all those people that have said, there's no God. I don't know how you can be so stupid. You must be a very weak person to need a crutch like that. But I know that my Lord answers prayers. I know he is real in my life. I have seen it over such a long period of time. But they say there is no God. And then they hear that trumpet. They see Christ coming with his crowns, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. They'll know that all their earthly systems of atheism, of evolution, of science, of all the ways that people have tried to say there is no God, they will be destroyed. And they will have to admit that God is for real. They'd rather hide under falling mountains than face up to it. That's why I want to try and give this message, so that people will not be misled by the things that people say. And so what else will be felt? At that time, as well as the earthquake, it will be the end of the sixth seal. And at the end of the sixth seal, there will be a plague of hail. And that plague of hail, the last of 7 plagues, which I haven't mentioned, they will fall on the world, just like the 10 plagues of Egypt did. Not unbelievable, because some have already happened in the world in the time of Egypt. And the 7th of those plagues, the plague of hail, will crash everything on the earth that's not already smashed down. Those hailstones will be as heavy as a car battery. This, the Bible calls us, is the wrath of God. God is a kind God, but God is also a God of judgment on those who have said he doesn't exist. And this is how it will all end. We shall be taken up to heaven with glory and beauty. Jesus said, if I go, I will come again. And he said, if I go, I'm going to prepare a place for you. You have got a home in heaven already with your name on it. Is that something that you would enjoy? And when Jesus comes, those who have lost loved ones will meet those people again. I can't wait to meet my Father, because when Jesus comes, people will be changed. They'll be changed in the blink of an eye, in the twinkling of an eye, the Bible says. Even those that have come out of the graves, they'll be resurrected and they'll be changed, just like that. White hair will be gone, glasses will be gone, signs of cancer will be gone, lameness will be gone, blindness will be gone. People who couldn't hear will hear. And I just long to look over those crowds and say, Dad, Dad, I'm here, I'm here. Who else is here? Who shall we go and find? And this will be happening all over heaven. There will be reunions on that resurrection morning. Husbands, wives. Paul, who was such a persecutor, martyred many. But he repented. He turned round. He will meet people in heaven that he put to death. What a reunion that will be. They will hardly believe their eyes to see him again, because we shall recognize one another. People recognized Jesus after he was resurrected. And if you have had a stillborn baby or a miscarriage, that baby will be given back to you to bring up in the joy of eternity. If you've had an abortion and if you have repented, then those children will be brought back to you. They will be alive. The murder that you committed, the commandment of God that was broken, thou shalt not kill, will have been repented. It will be forgotten, and God will make everything new again. Jesus said, joy cometh in the morning. Can you imagine that joy? That's what I want you to be ready to experience. It may change your life, it may challenge your life, but it's a good challenge and it's exciting. So my hope is that if you've heard these words and your heart has been touched, ask God, what do you want me to do? I don't know what you want me to do, but show me, and then follow where he leads you. It's exciting. Will you just bow your heads with me? Father in heaven, thank you for these words that have given us such hope, such comfort. We know that the world is full of danger. We know that everywhere there is fear, there's terror, sadness, tears. But you have promised when you come that there will be no more sorrow, no more crying, no more death, no more pain, because the former things have passed away and all things will be made new. I pray that each one who has heard this DVD may be challenged, may surrender their life to God, that all may be well with them when that cloud bearing Jesus breaks through on a world of fear and terror. In Jesus' name I ask these things. Amen.